waiting to go on a mission out to carry us.
So, hey, Mr. Frank, you want me to introduce you and we'll get started? You ready?
What?
You want me to introduce you and we'll get started?
Yeah.
You ready? Okay. All right, guys. So, as you know, today we have our very, very special guest with us. So we have with us Mr. David Thompson and Mr. George Franke over here. So I won't waste any more time and I'll let them get started. So if you guys maybe just want to give a little bit of background on who you are and where you were, what you did.
Well, Dave and I grew up together in the same town, right? Douglaston. I don't know if you know Little Neck Bayside, Douglaston.
In Queens.
And when Flushing is, you know what a Mets play, right? Yeah. I didn't really hang out with him until after the war, though, because he went to different high schools. I went to the Catholic schools, he went to the regular school. So, okay, let him tell his story about how he got there. What's that? How do you go? What'd you do? You enlisted in the Air Corps, right? Okay. Give us a synopsis.
Well, it was a funny thing because it was a big depression out of the United States at that time. And everybody was sort of sitting around doing nothing. And along comes the war to us. So all 12 of us lived in this small community, joining us simultaneously, almost overnight. He was one of the first. I was in the middle somewhere. And most of them, started in the spring. We were in the United States. And by September or October, everybody that was going to joined. The town was empty. We were all on training. And he was one of the first. You better start that.
First what?
So you jumped off the thing.
I enlisted, I had to wait till I was 18. My parents wouldn't sign the papers, and so I was 18 in September of 42. I just got out of high school and I just graduated, so I had to wait till September. I went down to Church Street, downtown New York, in the Navy building, and joined the Navy Air Corps. I passed written and said, I didn't get sworn in, but for some reason the commander wasn't there. He left, he went home early or something. So none of us got sworn in. And a week later, FDR, president, decided no more enlistments because everybody wanted to go flying. Everybody wanted to join the Air Corps or Navy. You have to go through the regular draft. I was stuck. I was fighting with the draft board. And now I'm going to Pensacola. Oh, no, you're not. They go through the draft. So I put down Navy on all the papers I ever got to fill out. I thought I was in the Navy. I want to go on the ground. Okay. I wound up at a Navy line. They could throw you any place they want. Marines, right? You go to the Marines, you're dead, right? Army, Navy. I wind up flying. And I found out after I got to boot camp in New York, Sampson, you had to either be a mechanic, or aviation radio man, or ordnance, a gunnery type person to get into the flying in the back seat. Okay, so I put in for radio because I had worked at a radio company for 6 months, and I got assigned to radio school down in Memphis, Tennessee. And after that, it was one school after the other. Radar school in Memphis. Shipped it down to Florida, Hollywood, Florida, which was nice. After miserable Memphis, the worst place to be in the summer. You die, you just sit there sweating to death, without even moving. And you're taking code all day. I learned the Morse code. You fall asleep taking the code. It was enough. Gunnery school, Hollywood was gunnery school, aerial gunner school, and we learned to shoot all kinds of guns, pistols, rifles, shotguns, 50 caliber, 20 millimeter. No, we had shotguns, double shotguns, everything but the 20 millimeters. And when I take the gun apart, when it's blindfolded at night, you can take it apart without looking, put it back together. So if you have a malfunction. And then from there, we went to Lauderdale to what we called operations. That was my first time in the back. My gunner sat up here, pilot here, and I was at the whole back end here. And a machine gun at the back of 30 caliber. This is a 50 and 250s here. Pilot could use. And I had the radar. I had the biggest area. I could stand up. Huge airplane. I had the radar equipment. It was all the black pockets were up in this area. And I had here's the door that you get in. You can see a picture or something. Showed me hanging on the door. And the radar was on a little bracket. Pull it out this way, get close to you where you were sitting. You stow it back in there, had a big transmitter. And then it was radio silence out there, so you couldn't talk on a transmitter. So anyway, that's why I wound up doing no navigating with that radar. And we couldn't operate without it. And after the operations training, we flew up to Quonset Point, Rhode Island. That's where we got in a squadron up there. I met this Navy commander, Turner Caldwell, who was an Annapolis graduate. Most of the people were not Annapolis graduates at the time, and they were enlisted, you know. So he wanted to set up a night squadron. It was strictly volunteer. He talked to each air crewman separately, each pilot, and he said, "You don't have to do this if you don't want it." Well, you know, we thought, well, the Japanese can't shoot that good at night, right? So maybe it's better to be a night squadron. But we didn't know about carrier landings. Carrier landings, a controlled crash at night, no lights on a ship, no lights on a plane. And we didn't know anything about that. So anyway, we fell for it, hook, line, and sinker, and we went into it. And we were assigned 2 pilots were looking for a crewman to fly with them. And it's a funny thing, one guy's name was Minton, and the other guy's name was Linton. Minton and Linton wanted me to fly over. For some reason, Minton I didn't like at all. He was a pain in the butt, you know. I fly with this guy, and I flew down to Grumman one night with him. He wanted to bring back a typewriter that he bought from some girl down in Grumman where they built the airplane. And he was kind of nasty on that. It was a real cold winter day. When we got back to Quonset, I jumped out of the plane and ran for the hangar. You know, this guy says, "Oh, you don't do that. You don't just jump out of the plane. You got to tie it down and do this and do that." I said, "Uh-oh, this guy's not for me, you know." So anyway, I wound up flying with Linton. He was great. He's from Nashville, Tennessee. And we stuck together. We flew together over a year. And Parry and myself, and both on that same picture. We did that over there, right? Yeah. I don't know, you know, I don't remember who took this picture or why. Most pictures they took on a carrier, we were posed, you know, we stood up there and everybody knew we were getting a picture taken. So when this was come up on a computer, one of my fighter pilot's daughters, of his brother's daughter found it. And she sent it to me in the mail, you know, from Pennsylvania someplace. And she said, "This might be you, you know?" And I said, "How could she know this?" Because she never saw me till I was like 70 years old, right? And I almost fell over. I said, "Yeah, that's me." So I don't know why he took it. We were getting ready to go on a mission. There's Mr. Linton. You had to call the officers, "Mr. This is my friend here, Mr. Dave, Mr. Thompson." And Harry, he's from Palmyra, New Jersey. His parents had a peach orchard down there, believe it or not. Yeah. Linton was from Nashville, Tennessee. A real rebel, you know. The pilots were older than the crewmen, you know, most of them were college graduates, maybe 3, 4 years older. And we were all kids out of high school. There was one guy that was 26 years old, believe it or not, was flying with us. He was married and had kids and everything. He was the oldest guy in the aircrew group. And he was from Iowa someplace. But I have to say we were all average 18. I turned 19 out there. My pilot I was lucky to get him because he was on his second tour of duty. He flew out of Guadalcanal, land-based out of Guadalcanal, which is a tough flight in those days. The Japanese are one end of the runway, and these guys are at the other end, you know? So he had it kind of rough. He was a good pilot, but he didn't know how to navigate too much. You can see here, he's got his navigating board with him, his plotting board, but I don't know if he ever used this. He used to carry it with him all the time, but he never knew where it was, you know? I had to hit him back to the ship with the radar. And operating at night, and the radio silence and everything, and the radar, it was like 300 ships in the Task Force 38 at the time, at least 300. Our ship, our carrier, was the only one that had a radar beacon transmitter, and we sent out a code. We sent out a little code. Dash. I would show up on your screen, put the radar switch on. Just, if you were in range, you could pick it up with 150 miles sometimes. And this radar scope would come in, we had range markers. We had setting 10-mile range, 50-mile range, 150-mile range. When this line here hit that bottom range thing, you could spit on a ship, you know, it didn't lie, you were right there. And you couldn't operate without that. That was the trick. That was the only ship that had a beacon until the USS Enterprise came out to relieve us. They also had a different beacon with a different code for their planes. So, but let's see, we went to, like I say, Quonset Point. We flew the planes to the Pacific coast. We had to pick up the carrier, was waiting for us to San Diego. And my pilot, we were going to take the northern route. We flew all the planes. These planes didn't fly very fast, like a DC-3, 160 miles an hour on a straight and level. So it took a while. The first day, we flew from Rhode Island. You won't believe it, as far as we got was Pennsylvania. We got in a thunderstorm. We landed in Wilkes-Barre on it wasn't even a paved runway, it was like cinders. And we almost all overran the runway, I swear. And a whole town came out. Never saw a Navy plane in their life. I could see the kids riding bicycles, people running from all over to see the plane, you know. And we stayed there about 15, 20 minutes to find out where we were. Our pilot says, we're not going the northern route. I had all these maps for the northern route. I had the old A&M ranges in those days for navigating. They don't use them anymore, they got VOS stations. But he says, no, we're going south. I said, oh, you know why? He lives in Nashville, right? And guess what? We're going to stay overnight in Nashville. And I think I slept in the airplane. He went home to his wife. I think he was married at the time, yeah. And anyway, we landed in after Nashville and Memphis. We stopped where I went through radio school. We had lunch there, and we went from there, Nashville, Memphis, then to Memphis. Let's see, where did we wind up? We had to refuel. Dallas. Yeah, Dallas, I think, yeah, that was the next stop. And then we went from Dallas to Abilene, Texas. And you go to Abilene, Texas. And Texas in those days was even worse than it is now, but it was a cow town, you know, there was nothing there but cattle, right? And they had a P-47 base there. We used to land at Army fields, but we got treated better there, right, than the Navy fields. They'd send out the crash truck when we folded our wings. See, these wings get fold up. They thought we were having a problem, you know, they sent out a crash truck. We stayed overnight in Abilene, and I was sitting in the cockpit. I was supposed to guard the airplane at night, so I'm sleeping up there, and a bunch of Army guys came out in a Jeep about 2 o'clock in the morning. They wake me up and they say, "Come on, we're going hunting," you know. I said, "What, are you kidding me?" No, we jump in the Jeep. These guys got 45s. They go barrel down in the boondocks, turn the lights off, and make a turn, they flip the lights on. There's all these rabbits with ears this long, they call them hares, you know, and they start shooting. These guys were nuts. And we had a lot of fun, but I was glad to get out of that place. Anyway, the next stop was, I believe, Tucson, Arizona, yeah. My pal says, "You know, they owe me a leave, and we're gonna stay here for a few days." And I said, "Oh, this guy's gonna get in big trouble." But he was a Lieutenant JG at the time, but he was in charge of the group. So, okay, we're gonna stay here, okay. So I think that's where I had my first drink ever in a bar. I thought bars were nasty places, all bad people went to bars, you know. I had a Tom Collins. It tasted good. Hey, this is nice, you know. I've been drinking ever since, right? No, but we wound up there. He stayed there for 5 days. The Admiral sent the telegram, "Get your rear end out here, we're holding up the carrier." And he sent 2 planes out of the group. We had like 10 planes. He sent 2 guys just to make the Admiral feel better, you know. I figured by the time this guy gets to San Diego, he's gonna be like a boot ensign again. I really thought he was gonna get bounced. We wound up in San Diego 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and San Diego has this weather thing where every night the clouds roll in the morning they roll out, you know, so they're about 900 feet above the ground. We made a landing, come down through the clouds and landed. I figured, oh, we're gonna stay in San Diego a couple of days to get to see San Diego. Well, all of a sudden I hear some noises outside. They're taking the gas out of the plane and draining fuel out. And they put a hook on and hoisted it up on the carrier. And about 2 minutes later, we're heading for Pearl Harbor and over this carrier. And we never got to see San Diego. So it took us about 5 or 6 days to get there. We were doing about 10 knots on a Jeep carrier. It was loaded with aircraft, replacement aircraft for the Army. The P-51s, P-38s, P-40s, all kinds of planes. Torpedo bombs.
Now I tell you about my house.
That's how you got your planes, right? So when you got to Pearl and we were stationed at Barbers Point, a couple of months night training, flying at night missions, low bomber runs. On the battleship Massachusetts, no less, which was one of, it's up in, I think it's anchored up in Boston, it's the same ship. We drop flares, you know, instead of bombs, but we do these low-level skip bombing runs. I'm talking low, I mean, 50 feet off the water. That's all the time we're doing. It's dangerous, because my buddy got killed, they flew right into the water one night. And, we lost our skipper one night too. Squadron skipper was the commander Towers. He was flying, and he was right in front of us one night, and I had him on the radar, and my pilot was flying right wing on him. And I picked up this thunderstorm, which was really big, you know, covered a whole big area. And I vectored them. I told the pilot, you gotta go around it. We vectored. Nobody called the other guy out. I don't know what his crew guys were doing, but he flew right into it. And next morning I woke up and the 2 crew guys were sleeping below me. The bunks were empty. So they flew, you know, you get in a thunderstorm, We looked for 3 days and we never found anything. So that was one of the bad things, but. Let Dave talk for a while here, I'm getting tired. So, what you did over there in China?
I joined the armed forces really roughly on my 30th birthday. And with the rest of them, I went to training. And we bounced around most of the United States. I went into the Air Force for training. And as a result, was flying training planes. So as we did our thing as far as learning to fly. And finally, it wasn't long. It was I don't know, we went overseas in 44, yes. That's kind of late. And they were preparing to do, well, we became support for an operation called Merrill's Marauders. And what they were ordinary soldiers with machine guns, light machine guns instead of heavy rifles and things like that. And when they needed supplies, they had the Air Force behind them. All they did was call up on the radio and they were a little short on ammunition. There you go. We were there and dropping it with a little parachute, maybe half an hour after they asked. And it worked perfectly. Drove the Japanese back. This was in Burma. And now what to do? They're going to move us up into China. They did. And we finally ended up in a city that you might have heard about. And that's
Xi'an.
Xi'an in northern, more or less northern Xi'an at that time.
Didn't have to.
Pointed it up there, further up.
Yeah.
You see Xi'an?
No, well, it doesn't matter. I think you've all heard of Xi'an from the carved army that they dug out.
So, guys, the terracotta armies, you've probably seen pictures. They were like clay soldiers in a tomb in China.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's right.
All right. And we had moved all the way up to the Yellow River, they call it. It's really in the center of China. And what we were to do then, our mission was to keep the railroads from running, which meant bombing bridges and machine gunning engines that were parked. In the daytime, they didn't drive them around because we had bombs that we could drop on them and things like that. They put them in a two-walled revetment, and we would have to attack them from the front or the back. And we're up there, and things are slowing down. The war is ending. And we got out there about 500 miles from home, going to the coast. We were way in the back part of China. And made a run on a locomotive parked in a revetment. The Japanese aren't stupid. They put lots of machine guns around a revetment like that. They're all set up for this. So guess what? Got a hole in my radiator. And you can't have that in an airplane. So I had about 5 minutes to circle around and get set up and jump out of the plane. And another interesting thing was the fact that I wasn't flying my airplane. We all had planes. I'll take a moment to tell you. This is my plane. And when I say my plane, the numbers on it are my numbers. And the way this picture, this thing was made, is that after the war, just after it, a lot of newsmen came in to get stories on what went on in China. There was no fighting anymore, but whatnot. And they got in a cargo plane which has wide, extra wide doors on the side, so that when you pack these big things that aren't heavy, you can get them in without any trouble. Well, these newsmen took the doors off and they went flying. They're standing in a doorway, I would say, as wide as from that table to that table, and about that high, with no railing, taking pictures of airplanes that would fly up. They were talking on the radio so they could ask these people to do things. And somebody was flying this airplane, not this model, but the model of the real airplane, the main model. And they said, would you pull in close to the cargo plane so we can take some good pictures? And he did that, the gentleman that was flying it. And next thing you know, company that does that sort of thing, make models in China, picked it up and was making hundreds of these things. So my airplane's all over the place. It's interesting because it's nice and it's exactly the way it was built.
You guys want to look at the pictures? Yeah. Here's a picture of the plane that goes in the back.
Well, these are P-51s. And they're our best fighter plane. And this is an earlier model of the same thing. And to show the radiator is here in the back, in the fuselage, in the perfect spot to get shot. That's the plane that won the war in Europe. And the #1 airplane for flying races. Yeah, everybody, these are all owned privately now. All of them.
Questions, they have questions. What the letters stand for?
So the letters on the livery on the side?
Well, they paint that on different things, but the R and J are probably the man's initials that owns it. That plane is worth $1.5 million. That's the way it is. And these people go to every length to make it go a little bit faster.
Now, while you were serving when it was an Army-owned
After the
plane.
war.
Right. So this one is a privately owned one, but the one that you flew during the war, what did it say? What did the letters mean on the side? I think is what he's asking. For the plane that you flew during the war, that one, what did the letters and the numbers on the side of that?
The numbers are a unique number. That's the license number of my plane.
Right.
Were your initials on
Things
it?
you see on the tail, the stripes and whatnot, indicate that that's our particular squadron. The squadron had about 12 airplanes.
He also had a nickname too, right? What do you call it? The Princess? Right?
Everyone named their plane Princess.
On the side of the engine. So anyway, it's a nice day. I'm 500 miles east of home, home being the base. The weather is nice. The only thing wrong is there's a hole in my radiator, and the fuel fluid is coming out. I have about 3 or 4 minutes to play it. So the thing to do is to get away from where these explosive machine guns were, and as far as I could, absolutely stupid. And also get closer to home, because I'm going to miss the evening meal. I'll be by myself in the dark. Anyway, I get to a point where I had to get out of the plane because it was beginning, the engine was beginning to go bad. And there was one other thing. It wasn't my airplane. It was the commander's airplane in the squadron. And he's 6 feet high, and I'm about 5'9", so, and the harness for the parachute is a webbing that you put on and have hooks and snap hooks, and you're in it tight. But the point is that that harness is adjusted, they can do that, to the person who's supposed to use it, which wasn't me in this case. And he was bigger than I was, so I had a loose set of webbing around me to keep me in the parachute. And that bothered me, really. Jumped out, and everything worked fine. And I saw what they call the drone chute. There's a little parachute on the big parachute that drags the big parachute out of the pack. And what I had done is jumped over the side, and it was about 1,500 feet in the air, and pulled the ripcord to get the thing going. And I could see the drone chute through my feet as I tumbled into that direction. And there it goes, it's pulling, and then bing, it caught, and I'm hanging there in the air, and then of course I'm letting go, and it's a little, you know, as I stopped in the air, I dropped a little faster, and I was only 2 feet off the ground. So bingo, I'm there, and it's a sunny day, and everything is just the way I want it. Not everything, because I still have 5 miles to go to get home. But I knew which way it was, so I started walking. And I say I walked rather fast. And, oh, it was a nice day, too. The sun was shining, it was warm, and fast, and lots of Chinese around. But they, in China, if you have a problem with something that you're looking at and you don't like the way it looks, it doesn't exist. So I didn't exist. These Chinamen would walk by me, never bat an eye, and I wasn't there. But anyway, to make a long story short, I was picked up. The Chinese were our friends in this area, and the Japanese hadn't gotten to the spot yet. So I made some contacts, and they took me in. And that night, we walked maybe, seemed to be about 50 miles, but it probably about 10. And I wasn't used to walking. I'm in the Air Force. And anyway, they bring me to a farmhouse. I mean, the area is an agricultural area. They grow something like wheat. And they hauled me into the house. These houses are all built the same way, 3 rooms. Big, big, big. The center room is the room you enter by, and the rest of the room is sealed up so that it can be used as a fort when people attack it, because they have the problem. And bingo. Well, they showed me a bed to sleep on, put it down. I hopped on it, tired, but what happened next? I hear a whistle, a train whistle. I'm back on the railroad. I was about 15 miles from it. And I'm not going to go through all the details after this. The war was ending. That was one good thing. And I stayed with the group that picked me up. There were these Chinamen that took me in and took me down to the house that I was in. And it seems that they were part of a team oh gosh, I'm thinking of, he wanted to be in charge of city city on the railroad track, on the main railroad track. I mean, nice towns there. Just things hadn't been banged up in the area I was in. So anyway, I find out finally, I'm sitting there with these people and moving about once every other day to another house so that I wouldn't be found. And they came in and said, guess what? The war is over. And there's an American in this town, it's up here that we're outside of. So we'd like you to go in and talk to this American who was a soldier, I mean, one of the Air Force people. He was in the intelligence end of the business. They took me in to see him, and what they wanted to do was discuss their plans, which was taking over the city after the war, with somebody that was part of the actual government, you know, on the winning side. And this fellow was in there, he was that way. Well, I went down to the station and told him the story, and he says, not see this train out here? We're getting on that and leaving. And, well, I had my choice at this point. I could stay with the people that had me. And by then, I mean, we were friendly and almost could talk to each other. I didn't know much Chinese, but that didn't, you know, I knew the people. I didn't know them for, at that time, about 4 or 5 weeks. Okay. This fellow was, it's hard to explain him. He was, it's an interesting thing you probably don't know. In Atlanta, the state I'm talking about, they have a big segment of the people, the ministers and things like that in Atlanta had gotten together and formed a
Mission.
say it,
A mission. A mission?
a mission, well, overseas,
A religious mission? Yes.
I'd say that every summer, there were at least 100 of these people leaving Atlanta and going over to China. And they were bishops and whatnot. They were passing on the religion is what they were doing. But the place was crawling with these people from all places. Atlanta. And here I got mixed up with these people because things were all over. And one of the big things that happened was while we were there, well, it happened before I was picked up, let's say, one of their bigger leaders, what's his name?
John Birch.
Yes, John Birch was on a hand car on a railroad because the Japanese were also quitting, you know, the war was over, really, and we're just going home if we can. And they had a little hand cart that you can pump with the handles, and there were 4 of them on the thing, and they went by an area that had communist Chinese. They're fighting the local Chinese government, and they're operating north of where we were. I mean, they had a pretty big setup, and they came out of the woods and stopped the hand cart. John was riding on. But John is into an argument with these people. And they get a little mad about it. They try to shut him up and he won't shut up. The next thing you know, they get out their rifles and they beat this guy literally to death. And left. They went back up into the hills and that was it. Well, that got down to the town and this other fellow who happened to be a West Point graduate had joined our version of this contact with these Chinese behind the lines. And he went out there and looked, and he didn't like what he saw, so he took pictures.
So there's two periods, so this is just the end of the first
Well, I
period.
finished up with the story.
Oh, no, you keep going.
Anyway, this fellow, he gets the bodies, and they were a mess. I mean, it's beaten to death, like an old rag doll. And he took pictures from all angles and sent it into the general that ran what was left of the 14th Air Force. That was our Air Force. And the next thing we had is, what was it? The Birch Society. That was it, right?
Yes, the John
The
Birch
Birch Society was born. They were against Chinese.
This was not the number on my plan, it was 23 with a white circle. That's just a model work. First mission that I had was against Palau, right here. We thought we were going to Australia, because we were sailing down here, and the admiral decided we're going to take this island. They should have bypassed, they lost 8,000 Marines.
Well, can you just stand more to the side, because the kids over here can't see,
Yeah.
just when you're
Oh,
pointing.
yeah. They lost 8,000 Marines on Palau for no reason at all. We should have bypassed it. Anyway, the next thing we do, we go up and hit Formosa. The only reason we had these night carriers was because the Japanese had about 50 airfields on Formosa on the west coast. It was all mountains down the east coast.
So guys, remember we talked about the island hopping, right? That the war in the Pacific was fought in all the tiny islands. You kind of took one and then jumped to another, right? So he's talking about all the different places throughout the Pacific that his ship is located at. Okay.
So anyway, we one night, the Japanese would raid our fleet at night, you know. We would fly all night and then we go to get some sleep and they come out in the morning and do the same thing, so we didn't get much sleep at all. You go general quarters, you had to get out of your bed, you know, you had to go to your duty station, which was already room on the aft of the carrier, and wait for orders. Anyway, we found out at night, we went in to get this Jap airfield, we saw all these lights burning in the water. What is this, you know? We figured maybe two fighter pilots got shot down. We thought maybe one of the guys was down there on a raft or something. No, they were lights. Japanese were smart. They had these big seaplanes, 4-engine. They fly around and drop these phosphorescent flares in the water that would burn for hours. And then the Japanese bombers, the Bettys, would fly and follow them right out, right to the fleet, like a road map. It was unbelievable. And they dropped flares at night. It'd be pitch dark, and all of a sudden a flare goes off, you know. Anyway, we went after them after they left, flew around the tip. There was a big radio station on the tip of Formosa. I picked it up on a radar, and I homed in on that and got us around the corner there. And then we went up, and we were about 5,000 feet. We didn't get much higher than that ever. Anyway, all of a sudden, two searchlights came on. They met right over the tail. They were radar-controlled searchlights. And believe it or not, when we were landing at Saipan, I saw Japanese equipment inside a compound. I could read the nameplate, and it was made by Sperry Gyroscope, U.S. company, right? They must have bought them right before the war. And As soon as those lights came on, right after that, you could see the traces coming up, the yak, you know, every fifth bullet is a trace that lights up, so it helps you find your target, you know. But they were under us, like this way, they couldn't reach us, we were out of range. Well, the pilot put it in a dive, and we went down low, and we hit that, we hit a 12-pound bars that night, and probably 50, 100 feet off the ground, all of a sudden, you let them all go on this seaplane base there, and start, the whole thing blew up, and then burn all over the place. We woke them up by 2 or 3 in the morning. They didn't know we were there, that's for sure. Because they wouldn't start shooting us until those bombs went off. Just before that, I had picked up a couple of bogeys. It was the 2 seaplanes, we had caught up to them. And I thought maybe we'll get a shot with our machine guns, you know. But the pilot didn't do anything. He told them that right above us, about a mile, half a mile. Just climb up a little and give us a shot, you know. He didn't do anything. And the fighter plane, we had this guy, Anson Berkheimer, was flying F-6, Roman F-6 fighters. He was with it. All of a sudden I see 650s go off. He nailed that one, and on the other side, shot down the other one with 2 in front of us. And then my pilot flying, I'm looking, I had a compass in the back. I didn't have the airspeed indicator. I had the compass and altimeter. And we go heading on 270, which is due west, right? Due west is China. He's going on all night, right? So, right then I was about 1,000 miles over the Beatles. Anyway, I called Mr. Linton, where are you going? He said, what do you mean? Going by a last name, Frank. The last name's Frank. What do you mean, Frank? I said, he said, you know, when up here, the land was on the right side of the scope. I said, going back, it should be on the left side, right? And he didn't say a word. He went at 180. If he went a couple more miles, we would have run out of fuel, you know. We're going to go 300 miles back to the fleet. So he turned around and then, the radar cable out to the wing. We had a scan right here, like you see those dishes on the DirecTV dish, same type. It was inside a dome, like, and it would just go back and forth. And you could see 180 degrees. You could tilt it, you could tilt it up and down. So anyway, it got hit, and the cable was shorting out, and the TV was going bonkers, you know. We don't blow the fuse, no picture. So I remember they had about 5 spare fuses. So I waited a while, and I wanted to pick up that antenna again at the tip, and get us around that corner. That I didn't want to go over the mountains. The mountains are 10,000 foot high, and we're going to go around and get back up to the fleet. So I kept putting fuses in. They last about 3 minutes the most. So I ran out of fuses right about down here. And it's supposed to be a sub there too, to pick us up in case we went down. And I found out 3 years later the sub sunk itself. It's on the bottom. Anyway, now the pilot says, now what do we do? He's supposed to be navigating, right? He asked me, now what do we do, Frank? I said, you know, you got a little black box up there. It's about this big. I said, turn that thing on. We call it ZBX. And you listen to the headset, you get loud Morse code. A to da, and is dot it, and so on. ABB. You listen to the loudest one, and the chart would tell you which heading. Each day's chart would change. One day A might be 90 heading, the next day it might be 180 degree heading. So this happened to be an N, and it was dotted, right? So my pilot says, that's an A, right? I said, no, that's an N. And then he started arguing. I had a big argument going on a bit. I said, how many words a minute did you take in flight school? He said, I had to take 6 words a minute. I said, yeah, we had to take 26. I said, who are you going to believe? So he shut up. You better be right, Frank. We'll wind up in a life raft and all this stuff, you know. I said, just do it. Take up that heading for you, and whatever it tells you. And sure, it got us back to the fleet. But, yeah, I couldn't use my code because it didn't show up. The radio was out, so I had to use that. The only way we could really find where the ships were. And our ship happened to be a little away from the rest because you want to turn 300 ships would have to turn into the wind so you could land. No, we had 2 destroyers and a cruiser and our carrier separate. So they just had to turn those 3 ships and 4 ships and land into the wind. But that was kind of hairy anyway. After that, we covered the Philippines. And a buddy of mine picked up the Japanese coming down this way from the north, and they called it into full Halsey, down the Halsey, and he wouldn't do anything until he got confirmation from a submarine. Well, he got confirmation already. He had the whole task force up here. And now, meanwhile, the Japanese came through these straits here, and they hit all the CVEs were down here. Like small carrier, jeep carriers, 3 or 4 destroyers, and a couple of cruisers. And we were kind of in the middle, we were up above them. Our sister ship, the Princeton got hit and got sunk there. We could see it burn out of the horizon. And 3 or 4 jeep carriers got sunk. They could have wiped out all those ships, but the Japanese commander, for some reason, you've probably seen it on TV, changed his mind. He drove back through the straits, get back through there on the other side. Nobody knows why he did that. Meanwhile, the big shots, Nimitz and them, they sent a telegram to Halsey, say, where's Halsey? Halsey blew his stack, he was ready to kill somebody. And he was stuck it up in here. Then finally came back home. At peacetime, he would have been back in the Pentagon, I'll tell you that. They couldn't move because there's too much going on. Anyway, after we covered the landings at Lady, we swung up here through the straits, down into the South China Sea. And we did quite a few day missions, mostly anti-sub-control. Nothing is more boring than flying anti-sub-control for hours, 4, 5, 6 hours, and see nothing but water, right? And you're trying to find a target. The periscopes, maybe this wide, about this high, sticking out of the water. Once I thought I saw something on a scope, I homed them in over nothing. Anyway, this time we picked up a whole convoy of ships. The Japanese had come down here from Java, up through all their stuff, all their gasoline and everything came from down here. And they come up this way and hugged the beach back up into Japan. All their oil and fuel and everything came from there. So I picked those ships up 150 miles. And at the time we were probably 5,000 feet. And gave my heading. We're going. Finally getting closer. I'm changing the range. As you get closer, you flip the range switch 100 miles, 50-mile range. All of a sudden, the whole scope went like covered with interference. I lost the target. It was a rainstorm. The rain comes in on the radar just as like a pit, and it blocked out the whole scope. Well, as soon as we got through the rain, everything was fine. It kept the same heading. And I got them down to about maybe 5 miles. I'm pulling off the ranges. Pretty soon, when's he going to start making a run? Because we're not doing anything. We're staying at 5,000. I looked out, I had a little window on the side there. 2 windows, one on each side. I looked out and I saw this ship down there, and I saw it looked like he was sending a light signal, He's shooting at us already. And I said, oh my God. Finally, went and woke up and put the thing straight down. And right off the coast there. The other ship, the map I have, I can't tell where exactly, but it was not up like Hanoi, right in this area, China, it was all French names. And it was a hill. There was a hill there. The beach was right here. And right here is this hill. Went up about 1,000 feet high. The ships were right here, going up here. We came around this hill, over here, we're clipping the palm trees, you know, the branches are almost sitting with the propeller. And down, around. Oh, I saw right here, a couple of huts, grass huts. And a police dog, I could see the police, I could see his mouth going, and marking us. That's the last thing I remember seeing, you know? And you come right across, this beach is right here. And you see the bullets hitting the sand. And out here, we got 400 or 500 pound rounds. And it was like this picture. Picture here. This is exactly what it looked like. Instead of this, we had 400 or 500 pound bombs, and they skipped into the side of the ship, went down the stack, and hung on the other side. The ship broke in half like this, and went down like this. And as they pulling away, I looked out the window, and the guys that's on the aft gun were still shooting at us. They were tied to their guns or what. And I see one guy going for the beach. And I said, oh boy, if we get hit now, we're going to be on the same beach with these guys. You know, it's not going to be fun, you know. So luckily we didn't get hit. I don't know how they missed us. Every ship in the fleet there was shooting at us. And wasn't one hole in the airplane. And that was it. That was the worst one. I thought you were going to get hit there. Anyway, we saw all these planes come. I picked up the rest of the carrier planes that come. We were the first ones there. These guys are coming by the hundreds, right? They wiped out all those ships. Did his job on them. And we got back, our radars working, so I got them back with the what do you call it, radar signal way down there. Beacon, radar beacon. Got them back to the ship, okay. And the Silver Star there, I gave him the Silver Star for that one. I still lost a medal for, they still overpowering me. They gave us nothing. We already had the air medal, which is, he's got right here, air medal. I got one too. Well, we should have got at least another air medal, which would give you a little bronze thing you put on there, you know, or DFC or something. So we did, anyway. That was a tough mission there. And we had a couple up there where President Bush got shot down at Chichijima, up in that area. And he was lucky because he was in a torpedo. I could have wound up flying with him because we were training up in Ponce Point. I'm sure he was there. He lived right up that area.
So, Mr. Frank, I was wondering if we could just hear maybe a little bit more from, if we give Mr. Thompson just a minute. Maybe just talk a little bit more about kind of where you were, maybe before you got to China, or So I was just wondering, maybe you could talk a little bit more also about maybe some more stories that you have of, you know, places that you were while you were flying. Maybe compare some of the stories or the places that you were to what he was just talking about.
Well, it was totally different people in the Navy.
Right. So maybe talk a little bit.
They did things totally different way. Special bombs and everything else.
He was doing air to ground missions mostly, right? Air to ground?
Huh?
Mostly air to ground missions.
Right.
Yeah, he wasn't going up like fighting air combat.
Right.
What we were doing is trying to destroy as much of the railroads as we could. They're not much, they don't have, if we can knock out something, a bridge or something like that, it would do a very good job.
So, do you have any maybe stories that stand out? Obviously, we know your major story. Are there any from various missions that you flew? Any stories that stand out?
You want the end of the story?
Well, we know the story, right? We talked about the story when you were shot down.
Well, it was interesting. I was picked up by I told you what the score was. The Japanese had the railroad, and they guarded them very carefully up to maybe 5 miles from the railroad. But really, they weren't interested in anything but 10 miles on either side of the railroad. It would go out and look for trouble. So the fellow that picked me up, the head man on the Chinese,
Warlord.
no, he's
A warlord?
warlord, that's it. And the reason he's a warlord is, number one, he's very educated. Number two, he was big for Chinese. And number three, I guess, is he had good contacts in the actual, we'll call it the southern Chinese government. Because up in the north,
I have a question. When you say he picked you up, do you mean after you were shot down, this warlord picked you up?
no, when they picked me up on the ground,
I'm not following how the warlord came to know you.
well, I told you, I made contact with the farm family in the beginning, and
The Chinese farm family.
they set me up to walk at night. They say we walked all the way back to the railroad. I didn't know it, of course, but I told you this when I got there and the sun started coming up. The next I hear is that railroad engine blowing a whistle. And I realized that I had gone all the way back. But it turned out the reason for all that was that there was a fellow that was well educated. It wasn't working for the Chinese government, he was working for his own government. He wanted to take over a small city on the railroad after he knew the war was going to end. He was up to date on all the stuff he knew. And he also had contacts in the real southern Chinese government. So what he was trying to do was use me as he saved this great American pilot routine to show that he's really, he should get incidentally, he did become mayor of the town I'm talking about, which was really a small city with an airport and stuff, and destroyed it, robbed them of everything they had. Got rid of it and sold it. I learned this afterwards. Anyway, what happened to me was that I got this fellow, I went to the railroad station and met this representative. He was, we had a group of specialists that went out and picked up pilots that had gotten marooned, but weren't captured. They used radios and things like that, and they knew the pilot was missing, so they could find him. They had been doing that for the last couple of years, I guess. Well, okay, the biggest interesting thing in northern China is that the northern Chinese were communists and hated the southern Chinese who were normal, what we call normal types, with Chiang Kai-shek running it. And they were ready to do battle. They were going to take over China, which they did. China is now run by communists. And they beat what was in there badly. He moved over to Taiwan, is what he had left. And we, the gentleman that I ran into and just graduated from West Point, this is very interesting. He was an army child, you might say. His father was a general, and when this fellow was a kid, and was down in the Philippines.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Okay, now he grew up in the Philippines with his father, a general. And so he had privileges the others didn't have. And he went to West Point and endeared himself to the people. They sent him out to China to get some, he wanted to be in the spy aid of the business. And he walks in and was kind of an obnoxious character because he had graduated from West Point and was laying it on. These people were running hardware stores and things like that, and they weren't
I
quite.
have a question. So this man from West Point, what I'm trying to follow is, so when the war ended, this general or whatever from West Point met you at the train station?
He had come out of the background because he had a radio, and he knew that the Japanese had surrendered. And that's what did all this, because the Japanese were running things in the North End and keeping back the communists at the same time. And now they have nothing to do with the home. So they got on their own trains, every time they keep running, and we're taking them up to the coast to move them out back to China, to Japan. And that's what I'm sitting here with the fellow I'm talking about. And he says, if you want to come with me, that's okay. And I said, I'm not going to wait for you. Had enough what we were doing, so I said, I'm coming with you. We got on the railroad, and I eventually ended up in Peking. Now the war was over. And the Chinese, with the American help, I mean, the Southern Chinese, were cleaning up a lot of the area around the railroads and whatnot. And the war was essentially gone. And I ended up in Peking with these fellows, and we were having a sleigh ride here. I mean, going out and looking the town over, and tourists we were. Until we got the word that the Marines were going to land at the port that Peking used. Let's go down and see them. And I say about 20 of us got on the bus or whatever it was, but ended up down at the station just in time. And there's this train pulled in, and these people looked like they'd escaped from a penitentiary. But guns are hanging out in all directions. And out in front is a colonel, and he's smoking, he's so bad. He's the army. They told him to come and occupy the facilities they had before any war in Peking. And guess what? They put him on a train, or a bus, I think they put him in a bus. And I was talking about maybe 500 men all together. Took them up to the center of Peking and put them in their old, they had a fort that was built back in the Boxer Rebellion. This occurred about 1900, long before what we're time now, but the building was still there. They put them in this cage. Actually, it was a prison. They were sitting on the wall on top. We were walking around on the ground and they could see it. and we're getting along with the Japanese and whatnot. After a couple of days of that, I went out and bought several bottles of champagne, and we had an airplane that once a day flew back to sea on for our base. And the base is still there. They hadn't moved anything yet. And I flew down to the base and passed out the champagne, and everybody had a good time.
So we have about 15 minutes left, so I know they all have some questions
Well,
that they would probably.
okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
Sure. So do you guys have any questions? Anyone want to start?
Yeah.
Okay, Brian.
Did you feel nervous flying over enemy territory?
So I guess for the both of you, so did you feel nervous flying over enemy territory? What were your feelings while you were flying?
I thought, everything was fine until it was a big adventure, right? Until they start shooting back. I got a little nervous. Everything was great till they start shooting back at you. And some funny things happened. I mean, it wasn't always rough. I'm flying over Palau, and I'm listening, and I hear these two fighter pilots talking. And one guy says, "You see that guy down there?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Go down and strafe it." And the guy says, "After you." The guy says, "I'm skipper up here." And the guy says, "Don't pull that skipper crap up here." I couldn't imagine what happened to that guy after he landed, but things like that went on. And, also at night, all of a sudden you get Japanese. A lot of Japanese pilots graduated from Stanford University, believe it or not, California, and they knew English pretty well. They knew a lot about the states. In fact, their big admiral, I think, graduated from Harvard or something, and they knew all about this country. And they come in at night, and all of a sudden you hear, "Give me vector to base." The fighter pilots will tell them where to go, "Give me vector to base." You die laughing, And like the guy's gonna tell them where to base or where the ships are, so no way. But stuff like that went on. And naturally, Tokyo Rose would be on the radio every night telling you how many ships they just sunk. Like we just sunk the battleship Iowa and the Jersey. And I looked out, here's the Jersey here and the Iowa over there. Come on, Tokyo Rose is funny. She played nice music. She used to play Glenn Miller music all the time. And she said, "See you boys, you should quit now and go home before you get killed," and all this stuff, And
So in general, were you nervous, like on a daily basis, flying? Were you nervous? The question was, were you scared flying?
Yeah, well, I had a job to do, and I'd be shaking sometimes, maybe, but I had my head in that scope, trying to see where we're going and how we get back to the ship. And you stop getting nervous when you see the wake of the ship. And by the way, you can see the wake of the ship in the Pacific 5-10 miles away because of phosphorescence in the water. And the Japanese could too. And when you hit the wake with your plane, you know you were turning final to approach to the landing, And you couldn't wait to see that wake and make that turn in there.
Question for you.
Was it hard taking off and landing on the carriers?
Yeah, we got catapulted all the time because at nighttime they wouldn't let you make a deck take off. But normally in the daytime, if you had a lot of the planes would be on a hanging deck, you'd be way aft on a ship. You need the whole length of the ship to build up speed, to take off. You probably have to do 90 knots or something before you get airborne. And actually, when you come off, we drop a little. Even a cat shot, you'd be standing still, 2 seconds later, you're doing 100 miles an hour, and you come off the ship, you'd sink down close to the water sometimes. That was kind of scary, The Essex class carrier, believe it or not, had a catapult on the hangar deck. The hangar deck is much closer to the water, You only maybe 30 feet off the water. The flight deck is 60 feet or more. So when you come out of there and you drop, you're going to go in the water. I didn't believe it, so I looked on one day and I see a plane get shot out of one of the Essex class carriers. I never knew they had hangars that carriers, but they did. So,
And for Mr. Thompson, I guess also a question. So for Mr. Thompson, so for you, so he's talking about landing on the carrier. For you, were the landing strips at the bases in China pretty well taken care of, or were there any kind of scary situations with that?
Well,
they weren't paid, right?
I described it, it turned into a vacation after the deal in PK. And I stayed on until, I guess it was the end of the year. I got assigned to a small aircraft carrier, what do they call them?
Jeep carrier. Jeep carrier, yeah.
No, the cargo boat was a deck. And,
Wait, Dad, excuse me, the question that he asked was, what were the landing strip that you had to take off from on a regular basis during the war, when you were flying? Were they well paved? Were they grass? What was it like to take off?
Dirt strips or grass strips, landing strips? Huh? You operate from a grass strip or a dirt strip or paved?
Gravel.
Gravel, right?
So was it difficult to take off and land?
I have more questions when it's wet.
Okay, Omar. So maybe you can go through the medals that you have and talk about what each of the medals that you earned were. So the medals on your chest, maybe talk about what each one of those means.
Those on, they're telling you that where I've been, really, more than anything.
Can you describe them?
The ribbons. The Atlantic, the Pacific, this is the Philippine Liberation Ribbon, this one, this is the good conduct. Victory medal, and that's it, you know? And the stars are for battles, and the air crew wings, when you first get your air crew wings, they don't have any stars, when you get the stars in there, and we couldn't wait to get our air crew wings, right? The Navy has the gold, we always wanted the gold, but with silver, it's a nice wings, a set of wings, but I still like to get those gold wings, you know. I got my tickets after I got my commercial instrument and multi-engine and all that stuff on my own. But Dave got it for the service, so he's a retired Pan Am captain.
One.
So was there still segregation in the Navy? And if there was, like, how was it?
Was in the Air
So
Force.
was there racial segregation in the Navy and the Army at that time?
Of course, yeah. Yes, most of the cooks on board ship were Filipinos. We had
Most, all of them were Filipinos.
yeah, and there
The
was
only ones allowed to touch it, I have to remember. That's serving.
we had one Jewish fighter pilot in our squadron, and
Finger bowls.
and guess what they called this guy? You're not gonna believe it.
Everyone know, but
They called him Hee Lee.
so
He
it's
goes by that name to this day and never bothered him a bit. Never.
so
He even
it's
wrote
sort of a
a
racial
sign
slur
for Hee
for
Lee.
yeah.
What?
So
Stuff didn't bother you.
it's sort of a racial slur for Jewish people.
I flew with the guy sometime down Florida. He's a guy, he's a nice guy. He never
Can't hear it. Speak up.
Actually, it's a separate operation.
Right.
But we coming home. As I say, we're in Shanghai at that point, and we're waiting for a boat to get on. Where do we end up on? what do you call those little, it's a Liberty ship
Yeah,
made over
a flight deck,
aircraft.
Jeep carrier. It's short, and they're wide enough, but they're pretty short, you know. And we went over on a Jeep carrier from San Diego to Pearl Harbor on the USS Army Big. It was one of the ones that got so.
You said you went to how was Pearl Harbor?
When I got to Pearl Harbor, it was like a year and a half after it happened, you know, and Arizona was sitting there, you know, really, I wish they would have left it just the way it was, you know. They took the whole superstructure off and put this thing across the town, but you know, it would have turned into a rusty hull, so I guess they did the right thing. It was sad to see, but that's the way it was, yeah.
Fantastic.
What was the ranking?
So what were your ranks? What were your highest ranks when you?
His highest rank right there, and the first lieutenant. I was an ARM 2C.
That was be a cap.
Like a sergeant in ARM 2C. My gunner was AM 2C. My pilot was a Lieutenant JG, and he made me full lieutenant out there. I brought him as first lieutenant, but I was, you know,
Which project?
What type of things did you do after the war was over?
So what did you do when you got home? Went to
I used to
school.
do a lot of tricking.
Where did you go to school?
I went.
So where did you go to school?
I became a pilot again. I worked for Panorama.
Yeah, before that, though, he was a smart guy, MIT. Electrical engineer, I went to MIT. He worked for a big power company, Basco. I went to, I wanted to go to Fordham, because I went to all Catholic schools up to then, and I went to Fordham. Jesuit said there's a year wait to get in. So I said, forget it. I went over to Columbia, I got my in Columbia, so I graduated from Columbia.
No. So we didn't really talk about this yet. A little bit. We mentioned, remember the GI Bill, right? That would pay for soldiers for their housing and for college. So did you guys take advantage of GI Bill? Right. Okay.
GI Bill, it's terrific, yeah. I think we got the college without the GI Bill. But you know what, it was a credit then at Columbia, it was $16 a credit. 16. Yeah.
Nowadays, how much?
A lot more.
We got so much a month, subsistence, beer money into it.
Anna?
What were your feelings towards discrimination? So what were your
Discrimination against him.
and then the African Americans and there was still segregation?
Okay. So what were your feelings about the segregation in the armed forces? What were your feelings about the racial segregation in the armed forces, like having separate African American units and separate Japanese units? So what were your feelings about that segregation? Should they have been separated, or should it have been?
What do you mean by separate?
So like you had the Tuskegee Airmen who were only African American. You had like the specifically Japanese American units and the.
Well, the Japanese Americans had a hard time. I didn't clear the government. Those are not make big mistakes.
I didn't really think about that much. It just African-Americans, and there were not hardly any in the Navy and out from the war. On the carrier, Filipino mess cooks, and that was it. And so later on, when I finally let the African-Americans go to flight training and everything, in the Air Corps, but that never happened in the Navy that way. It just happened kind of gradual. And still not many Afro-Americans go in for Navy flying. I don't know why. A good friend of mine, Grumman, was a Grumman test pilot. He's the only Afro-American test pilot Grumman ever had flying for him. He's a heck of a nice guy, and everybody likes him. And he got along fine with everybody. We dealt with him.
Okay.
What
bomb being dropped in Japan.
Atomic bomb.
Yeah, what was your reaction?
I really wasn't too happy about any of the bombing that was going on. I don't think I would have ever been a gunner on a B-17 or something, dropping bombs on cities, no way. And I don't think we ever killed any civilians in any of our missions. I hope we didn't. We only hit air bases and shipping. We never hit any cities or civilian areas. They stayed away from that, you know. And maybe just didn't do that. We hit ships. And we said,
So,
Your
It was all over Japan.
what, Japan?
I think you were saying his specific.
Yeah, but they didn't drop bombs.
More than Tokyo, any city is all bomb.
They were trying to hit factories and stuff like that, probably.
No.
It's the only time that I know that they did that. You know, they didn't do it in the Philippines. We hit airfields and factories, that's it. They didn't bomb cities, they didn't fly over Manila and drop bombs. Oh, yeah, Nichols Field, Clark Field, any little airfield they could find, you know, or harbor shipping, stuff like that.
So for Mr. Thompson, so you were on the ground when the war ended. So how long did it take for you to hear about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? So how long did it take for you to hear about the atomic bomb, and what was your reaction when you did hear about it?
Oh, I was undercover, if I said, I was with the warlord. So I didn't get any of that.
So what
I was on the railroad track there when the bomb was dropped. But I didn't, it must have been never talked about it. I mean, none of the people.
It's probably the last question, Dorian.
What were your personal views on FDR?
So what were your views on FDR as a president? So your views on Roosevelt as a president?
The greatest. Oh, man, I couldn't believe it when he passed away. I think he should have stayed president forever.
So your views on FDR, on Franklin Roosevelt as a president, what were your views on him?
None?
I'm sorry? So your personal views on Franklin Roosevelt as a president?
Roosevelt.
Right.
Excellent.
All right, well, so that's our time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again.
By the way, I was right here.
Thank you so much.
When the Intrepid got hit, it was right behind us.
No, that was great. Yes, that was fantastic. Really. Thank you.
Thank you. Your kids are all great. Thank you. You want to